Good. No problemos. As far as I know.
At this moment.
At this moment, that's right. We got to go to singing last night up at City Room. Jimmy and I went over there. Dan Manuel preaching the meeting over there. Perry, the preacher, asked me to come lead singing on Monday night. I got to thinking, I got to go to bed for Monday, come back home and then go to church. sisters, are you comfortable?
All right. Did you have a screwdriver? Yeah, and a screw. Yeah, I can't get this thing to stay in my ear. I got all kinds of things hanging off my ear. Staple gun, that'll work. Tape. Duct tape. Yeah, how do you blow your nose?
They tell me you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. And you put nose ring, saw a girl last night that had two little rings, but one on each side of her bottom lip. I don't understand.
How in the world do you eat soup? How in the world do you eat soup? All over it, you just wear it. Have you noticed that?
Old fashioned makes more sense the older I get.
That's what I've always said. People say, well, why don't you get a tattoo? It's like, well, I'm just trying to get out of life with as few marks on me as I can. I got all kinds of marks, scars. I don't need to just go out adding any. All right. We got any announcements tonight? I guess we're missing quite a few folks.
Yeah, I got one.
Okay.
Jim Green texted me about an hour ago yesterday. He hadn't had a good day.
Oh,
So he can't make it this afternoon.
all right.
And talked to Ricky. Ricky's he's still taking antibiotics. His tooth still ain't quite proceeded yet.
Yeah.
They're supposed to try to get to see the dentist this week, I don't guess you had it.
No.
Well, he's a trooper. He did the prayer. Today was Tommy Smith. We maybe didn't. Yeah.
Tommy Smith
Yeah.
sent us the nicest card.
One of Nancy's cards.
Yeah.
And caught mine. I said, that is nice.
Yeah.
Real nice. Had our picture on it, the whole 9 yard. Nancy's doing all that.
Good job.
That is I compliment him.
Yeah.
Made me smile.
We want to try to do what we can to reach out to his wife. His wife teaches at the Methodist Church over in Longview. She's a kindergarten teacher over there. I think.
The little children's.
Yeah, I think she's in the little children's stuff. Yeah.
Her name is Debbie.
Debbie. Yeah, Debbie Smith.
Arlene sent her a note, and she wrote like a 3-page letter back to Arlene.
Well, good.
But, I asked Tommy, I said, we don't want to push, and he said, don't push, just keep inviting.
Keep inviting and be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I met her at Golden Corral one day. Sharon and I were up there and saw Tommy, he introduced me to her. She has them all.
Yeah.
She, how to get them all to talk to you.
Nice, invited her, but that's about as far as you can take it.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll just keep trying and everything. Anything else? Any?
Jimmy has picked up another congregation in Edgewood who are going to miss support. He's preaching in Marshall at the West Side congregation this Sunday morning. He's preaching at the Graceton congregation next Sunday morning on the 12th and 19th. And then he leaves to go move to Bedford on the 24th or 25th.
Are we going to see him before he leaves?
Unless he's here
All right.
Oh, well, yeah, one more thing. This morning Joanne said that Jeanette Jones has been in the hospital. Did you know? She's home now. I do remember she said she's home now.
Yeah, she was here Sunday, I
But
think.
she was really, really sick, like of choking and dizzy and, so, and just couldn't get, so the doctor, the neighbors, they called an ambulance to, but then they really couldn't ever find anything wrong with her exactly, but they, I don't know what she said, said that in the past, sometimes maybe she's had a stroke, a little one.
Oh.
Small stroke, they found that out from just running all this tests. But I don't know, I meant to call her this afternoon too, she did text on that thing, so. Yeah, she did. Yeah, so I think she's okay. But anyway, I didn't know, check on that, Joe.
So we all hospital she in, or is she back on?
She's at home, but she'd been at Good Shepherd, but they said they didn't even have a room for her, but then we kind of decided that might have been a personnel issue or something.
Oh, wow.
That's-
All right, anything else we need to remember to pray for? Okay, Brother Jerry, we'll turn it over to you.
Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this wonderful day, Father. We're so blessed and so thankful to you, Father, for giving us an opportunity this evening together. I know it's a small number, Father, but we pray that our services this evening be pleasing to you, Father. We thank you so much for each day you give us. We thank you, Father, for our health, the happiness that you give us. We thank you so much, Father, for so much goodness in our life. Father, there are many that are mentioned this evening, Father. Those on our sick list, we pray for them, Father. And we pray for those that weren't able to make it this evening, for whatever the reason. We pray, Father, that they will be back the next point in time, Father. We thank you so much for this war you created for us. We see so much that you give us each and every day, Father. We know we're blessed, and we thank you. Just with all my heart for all that we have, all that you've given us. Thank you, thank you, Lord, for loving us as much as you do. Please be with the brothers Joe here as he gives us another lesson, Father. Thank you again and always for this opportunity and the blessings that you give us. Forgive us what we have done, Lord. This in Jesus' name we always pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. All right. I always go back that what we're working on is a pathway to communicate to people, to give them a reason to believe in God, and to share with them some of our reasons for believing in God, and to give them a basis that will challenge their thinking if they don't believe in God. And it's not that any one of these lessons is a standalone, this is the silver bullet. It's really, it's a thinking progression that it's a pathway that we're trying to lay out as a way to communicate with people. Remember, we had talked about it in the early goings-on about science, what its limitations were, and people very often don't think about what the limitations of science are. You know, I like watching the YouTube stuff, and probably drives Kathy nuts, but the thing, we watch some of the YouTubes about, you know, oh, they think on this moon around Saturn they may have found life, you know, and you see all these kind of statements, maybe they found life. Well, maybe they didn't. You know, it's one of those things, but you hear all this wishful thinking that really isn't supported by any data. What would happen to your faith if they did find life out there? Have y'all thought about that? Nothing. It's just like this world, right? You know, the world, what we've said before, the world's the world. God created it. It has dinosaur bones and all that other kind of stuff in it. That's how God made it. And So anything that's discovered and anything that's found really shouldn't shake our faith at all. And if they find life out on whatever place this is, it doesn't prove evolution. It just proves that they found life in some other place. That's all it proves. And so, we got to keep a straight thinking when it comes to science and all these things that they keep trying to shove at us. So maybe there's life out there. If life was that easy to generate, we'd see it everywhere. It's not that easy. And that's why you don't see it all over the place out in the universe. But anyway, we talk about the limitations of science, and then we talk about that belief in God's existence is rational. Remember, we talked about the two worlds, the evolved world and the God-created world, and they are identical. So how would you know which path or which direction things went in the past? Well, we know it's by revelation, but we've got to open that door for folks to broaden their thinking. It's like, what would happen if God did create the world and you thought that it was evolution that brought the world about? You see, you kind of begin getting that thought in their mind that there's more than what science projects, and that believing in God's existence is rational. We talked about believing in God's existence is logical. It includes all the data. We aren't throwing out some of the data just to support what it is we want to believe, that it's data inclusive, and it deals with the factor that humans are unique. We're different than other animals, and that everything that we're discovering is consistent with what the Bible tells us. We talked about thermodynamics. Remember thermodynamics? Yeah, everybody got that word memorized? Thermodynamics. What's the third law of thermodynamics? Real important one. Everything is degrading. Okay? Things are not getting better. Things are falling apart. And if you want to see a good example of thermodynamics, you can go look at my car, right? I just love to park that thing out in the parking lot and walk back out there and go, oh, the seals are better. Well, that isn't how things work. And the whole universe operates according to that third law of thermodynamics. We talked about how that belief in God's existence is practical. It's really God's existence that gives strong underpinning to right and wrong, to there being justice and accountability. Without those things, you have no basis for those ideas. Without God and without rules, a rule giver, without the Creator, you don't have a basis for being able to say something was right or wrong. So belief in God's existence is practical. And last week we talked about belief in God's existence is realistic, that when we go back and look at the revelation that God has given us through the Bible, what we see is that Bible is accurate, that Bible is precise. Every time it describes a historical event, it matches up with what the historical event is. And so we see that there's reliability. It's specific and truthful. There's reliability in the Scriptures. And so there's no other book that's that reliable. Okay, there's, I don't know, maybe Dick and Jane, but when you really look at the number of authors that wrote the book over, the documentation occurred over about a 1,500-year period, because remember, Moses was about 1,500 BC. You've got all those writings that he did in the first 5 books. You got all the prophets that came through after the days of Solomon, and you got all the history of David and Saul and those folks. Remember, Solomon was somewhere around 1000 BC. You've got the captivity, the Assyrian and the Babylonian captivity, and all those prophets, and that's in the 700s to 600 to 500 BCs. And then you got the latter-day prophets in the Old Testament, which would be Zechariah and Malachi and those guys, which is about 400 or 500 BC. And they prophesy about things that are 300 BC. You know, they tell things that are going to happen very specifically in a couple hundred years. Who was that we talked about last week? Remember the prophecies? The fella died in 323 BC, and his horse's name was what, Debbie? Bucephalus. Yeah. Who was that? Alexander the Great. Yeah. And so he talks about all that stuff, and the Bible is just reliable that way. That gives us reason to put our faith in the Bible because it doesn't lie. And of course, it has as its basis, amongst all those people across 1,500 years, God hates lying. All right? So why would they put something that's a lie in this book if they're telling you God hates lying? and no liars get to go to heaven. So if they wrote something that was a lie, they don't get to go to the heaven that they told us about. So that's one thing about the Bible being realistic. The other thing we didn't really talk about last week about the Bible being realistic is most all those folks, all the apostles, ended up dying horrible deaths for the message that they preached. Well, what's the chances that 12 people who are involved in a conspiracy are going to go to their death without one of them saying, I lied? You see, those guys were telling the truth, and they went to their deaths because of it. So anyway, the Bible is realistic. It tells us the way things really are when it comes to the divine realm. Tonight's lesson, we want to talk about God's existence. Belief in God's existence is hopeful. Okay, belief in God's existence is hopeful. And then next week we want to talk about belief in God's existence is inevitable. That'll be the last one of the series. But belief in God's existence is hopeful. All right. The thing for us to remember, and as we communicate with people who don't believe in God, that without God, the meaning and purpose of our lives is no different than a cockroach, a temporary biological engine to work, suffer, and then die. Okay, now that's what science has to offer us, right? That it's going to have all this knowledge, it's going to tell us all this stuff, but basically where they're starting from is that we as humans are no different than the rest of evolved creatures, and therefore all we are is a biological engine. Okay, we take fuel in the form of food, all right, and water and air. We take those elements in. Our body then takes those elements and it processes it. It gives us the ability to do some work. The engine breaks down over time, you know, and you get a little pain here and a little ache there and a little hitch here. And the thing about it is that you suffer. Your biological engine, just you keep getting these signals saying, hey, we're breaking down up here, you know, and you suffer and then you die. Well, isn't that what a cockroach does? Cockroach eats, leaves droppings all over your house, may get stepped on, may get poisoned, or it may die a natural death. A cockroach is a biological engine. And that's all science sees us as is a biological engine. What that does, and we see this happening in our own society right now, is people are coming to the conclusion that this life is meaningless. Okay? If all I am is a biological engine, what purpose is there in living? And if there's no purpose in living, then why don't I just go into a school and shoot up a bunch of people? Okay? Why don't I just let somebody die while I'm watching and I just stand there and I don't do anything? You know, you see these behaviors in society that reflect what science has been telling. If you're just a biological creature, I have no responsibility to keep your engine running. And so you see society behaving that way. They're believing those things. Do you think society would be different if what we explain to them is there's a day coming and we have to give account for what we did, and if you did bad things, you're going to go to a bad place forever and ever and ever, and you're going to suffer, and you're going to be in pain, and you're going to wish you weren't there. That's the one thing that's common between paradise and Hades. Both groups of people agree where you ought to be, okay? You ought to be in paradise. The rich man was saying, go tell my brothers not to come here, okay? They all agree on the other side of death. You don't want to go to where the rich man went. So the thing about it is, if people had those convictions, if people were taught those realities, would it make a difference in how the society behaves? And the answer is yes, it would make. There would be some reservation on the part of these people that says, you know, I want to go do a bunch of evil stuff and make a name for myself. And the deterrence is, but I might get killed and I might be punished forever. Maybe I don't want to do that, you know. So you get a hold of a few people that can think, and you prevent that a little bit. But what science leaves us with is an empty life. And if you really go and you ask people, what's your purpose in life? Or ask them this, what does evolution say your purpose in life is? You see, all of a sudden it's, well, my purpose is to take in nutrients, to suffer, and to die. That's what my purpose is. You know, and so, well, we can build something. You know, we'll make life better for future generations, right? A lot of folks think that way. We make things better for future generations. Well, that didn't work out so well for the Jews under Hitler, right? That future generation wasn't even around anymore. They all got killed. So what did all that work do that they put together for the future generations? You know, I'm going to build a big monument to myself. I'm falling apart here. I'm going to build a big monument to myself. I'm going to have my head on Mount Rushmore. You know, apparently there's places for heads on Mount Rushmore, but I'm going to have a head on Mount Rushmore. Okay, what are you going to do when Yellowstone blows up and covers up in ash? You know, they keep talking about all this stuff. You know, the thing about it is, all these reactions that people have, or these ideas that they have that gives their life meaning, those are vanity, all right? So if we're going to talk to somebody about the meaning and purpose of life, and they believe in evolution, which book of the Bible do we need to go to? Ecclesiastes. That's right. And remember what Ecclesiastes says. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. If we don't have time to really get into Ecclesiastes in depth tonight, but I put an outline of Ecclesiastes on the back of your notes there. But Solomon really gives us the key to really talk to people who only believe in science. I saw an interesting quote that came off of this website that I put down at the bottom of the back of your second sheet on the outline of Ecclesiastes. And the quote says, "This book is God's classic presentation of pre-evangelism." Remember, we talked about pre-evangelism is people need to be brought to a point where you can begin to evangelize to them. And Ecclesiastes is the book that does that pre-evangelism. How good do you feel about your life? Do you feel like your life is full? Are you accomplishing something with your life? What do you think your life's purpose is? Those kind of things. Solomon deals with those issues in Ecclesiastes. Let's look at a couple verses and kind of work a little bit through it. We're only going to go through about chapter 2 a little bit, but look at these verses. Chapter 1 and verse 3. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? Now, the way to translate that into Texas is, what's the use? Right? Of all that stuff that we do, of all that activity that we get involved in, what's the use? And what good does it do? And that's what Solomon really points out. What profit does a man have from all the labor in which he toils under the sun? Look at verse 8. All things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. And his point there is life is really empty. You can't fill it up with stuff, and you can't fill it up with things that are empty in and of themselves. He's going to talk about knowledge. You get into evolution, and you say, oh, we got all this knowledge about evolution. And Solomon's going to say, so? What does that do for you? And so Solomon points out life is empty, that you're full of labor, and you really can't express how empty it is, because your eye, you can see everything in the world, but your eye isn't satisfied. You're just not filling it up. You can hear everything that's ever been said, but you just hadn't heard enough. Well, it's not filling you up. It's not giving you meaning, is what he's saying. Look at verse 11. Chapter 1, verse 11. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. All right? What Solomon's pointing out is, if you think you have a legacy, you're fooling yourself. You're not going to have a legacy. All right? How many of you remember the name of the Italian that raised sheep in 608 BC in northern Italy? Who knows? They'll know what that guy's name was. They dug up some guy up in the Alps a while back, and they had done all this analysis, and they had determined he had various ailments based on his teeth, and he had been in various wars based on cuts on his bones and all this other kind of stuff, and he had been of a certain occupation based on the stuff that he wore. This guy that they found was frozen, so they found all that stuff out. What was his name? The thing about it is nobody remembers his name. And that's what Solomon is saying is, of all the stuff that we try to create a legacy for ourselves, 1,000 years from now, if the Lord let things go that long, isn't anybody going to know? You look at the pyramids. We think this pyramid was to this king. Well, they don't know. They're digging up new pyramids all the time. They don't know who they went with. The thing about it is this concept of a legacy. I want to leave a lasting legacy. It's vanity. The folks are going to come by down the road, and they're not even going to remember who you are. How many of you remember the name of your great-great-great-great-grandmother? You only have to go back 5 or 6 generations, not very long. Who knows who I came from? And so the thing about it, this idea of, I want to be remembered, that it ain't going to happen. And so people that are doing things to be remembered are going to have emptiness, because life produces no enduring legacy. Verse 13, chapter 1. And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that's done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of men by which they may be exercised. Burdensome task. Life is just a bunch of work. All right? And he set out his mind to know these things, but life is simply an occasion for suffering. You know, that's what exercises us, is all that work, all that suffering. Look at verse 17. Chapter 1, verse 17. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this is also grasping for the wind. You know, you see all these people, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have achieved my life's goal when I get to be a PhD. Okay. How much is that PhD going to work for you after you're dead? You know, you get all this knowledge, you get all this stuff stored up in you, and you think you're really something. But when you're dead, it's gone. You know, and that's what Solomon's saying. Even all that, trying to get wisdom and trying to get all that knowledge is like grasping at the wind. You know, how many of y'all have been able to hold the wind in your hand? Doesn't work too well, does it? I don't know if you're like me, but it squishes out through my fingers. And the thing about it is, you know, you've got different things that people do, and that as he says back up in verse 2, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It's all for nothing. You know, so everything that people think about, it's all for nothing. Look at chapter 2 and verse 1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. But surely this was also vanity. How many folks do you know that are just interested in a good time? All right. You go to Six Flags once a year, you have a good time. What good did it do? You know, is your life's purpose fulfilled by going to Six Flags once a year? Mine wasn't. But the thing about it is, you have people that they just live for pleasure. As long as I can have pleasure, my biological engine's happy. Okay? But the thing about it is, what those folks will realize someday, and we can tell them, can't we, that those pleasures get replaced with aches and pains and groans. You know, and it's like, now what do you got? You know, you've had all that pleasure, now what do you got? And so vanity of vanities, everything's vanity. But there's a lot of people, they will not pay attention to what Solomon's saying because they're looking for pleasure. And that's how they try to satisfy that emptiness. And the question to really ask those folks is, what are you going to do when the pleasure's all over? You know, what are you going to do when that ends? Because it'll come to an end. And when they say, well, how do you know it'll come to an end? What do we say? Look at me. You know, I'm broken down. I'm old. And someday you'll be that same way too. All right, number 4, chapter 2, verse 4. Look at what he says here. I make my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. What we see is a lot of people react to this emptiness and try to fill their life, the emptiness in their life, with this idea of staying busy. Okay? You know, they don't want to think about how meaningless their life is, and so to avoid thinking about it, they stay busy. You know, and they're just busy all the time, and they go to bed, and they're wiped out at night when they go to sleep, and then they get up in the morning and have 3 cups of coffee, and boom, they're back on it again, and they stay busy. But they never think, what is life all about? Is this practical for me to do? What am I getting out of this? You know, and what Solomon is saying is, again, that's like grasping at the wind, but it's what people do. And you know, when we talk to people, and we ask them, you know, do you have hope in your life? Well, yeah, they have hope. They hope they'll buy a house someday. They hope they'll get married. They hope, they got these temporary hopes. What are you going to do when that's gone? What are you going to do when that's gone? Is that going to give you life meaning? There's a whole group of people that spend their whole lives trying to get something to satisfy the need to fill the emptiness in their life, and those things don't fill that emptiness. And it just keeps them busy and keeps their mind off of things. Now, verse 7, chapter 2 and verse 7 says there, I acquired male and female servants and had servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. You got there that idea. I'm looking for power, and I'm looking for possessions, and I'm looking for renown. I'm looking to be famous. What Solomon tell us? If that's what your life is all about, if that's what you're going to go try to get is power and things and famosity, you're going to have an empty life. Look at those movie stars that have all that stuff. How many of those people are happy? How many of those people have some kind of purpose? And you look at the kind of success that they seemingly had, and you look at how miserable they are with all that success. They're bad at interpersonal relationships. They're bad at managing their money a lot of times. And a lot of those folks take their own lives. So it's kind of like, I don't know, you get all that stuff and your life's still empty. Life is vanity. All right, chapter 2, verse 12. Then I turned to myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who succeeds the king? Only what he has already done. So you got people that are looking there for wisdom, and you got all kind of people. It's like, if I can just discover the meaning of life, I'm going to climb to the mountain. I'm going to talk to the guru. I'm going to find out the meaning of life. Well, the thing about it is, Curly told us what the meaning of life was, didn't he? Y'all remember Curly? Huh? Curly. No, not Three Stooges. The other Curly. You remember Billy Crystal in that movie? And Curly was the cowboy. So there's only one thing. You find that one thing. He told us what the meaning of life was, right? Really did. You find that one thing. And that's the meaning of life. But the thing about it is you got people searching in all kind of places for wisdom, and particularly Solomon. He's exploring everything, every which way he can. He's surrounded himself by pretty women. He's eating the best that he can eat. He's coming up with all kinds of science and knowledge and theories, and he's building his empire, all this kind of stuff. Do y'all think Solomon was a very happy person? With all that wisdom that Solomon had, do you think he was a happy person? You look at what he kind of says here in Ecclesiastes. It's a vanity of vanities. Everything's vanity. Here I've got all this stuff, and I got to leave it to those worthless kids. Right? He's kind of talking that way, I don't see Solomon as being a very happy person, particularly when you see what Rehoboam did to his kingdom. But the results of substitutes are all in chapter 2 and verse 15. So I said in my heart, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. All this stuff that Solomon has worked on and dealt with, he really comes to this intermediate conclusion here is, at the end of life, I'm dead like everybody else. Whatever I've done, whatever I've accomplished, whatever I've tried to do to fill my life, at the very last day, I'm just like everybody else. There's an idiot out there. He's going to die. I'm going to die. And that's what Solomon kindly comes to the conclusion is, Okay, if you want to think like Solomon and you want to think like these evolutionary people, then you got really three things. I'm a biological engine. Life is here for my suffering. And then I die. Okay, so Solomon really deals in the book of Ecclesiastes with this life problem. But the thing about it is, everything that Solomon points out is, if that's what your life is all about, what kind of hope do you really have? And that's where we have this point. Belief in God is hopeful, because belief in God is what gives us that ability to say, I have a part of me that's going to live forever. And these are in the scriptures at the bottom of the first page of your notes. I have a part of me that's going to live forever. And God's told me there's a part of me that's going to live forever. That forever part of me, I don't know what exactly it's going to look like. Remember, Paul said we don't know what we're going to be. We just know we're going to be different and we're going to be in an immortal body. Whatever that is that we're going to be, Paul didn't know it, so I can't tell you what it is. But that's what we're going to be. And if we follow what God says to do, and we recognize Him and we believe in Him, we are privileged to have a hope of being with God in heaven forever. All right? I don't know about you, but that's a pretty nice hope that we have, that we're going to be resurrected from the dead, because I believe in a God who said, let there be light, and there was light. Remember, Joe talked about the 5 pillars. The resurrection from the dead is one of the pillars. Our God has the ability to not let us ever die. Okay? He's got that ability. If God said, I don't want Joe Wilbert to ever die, you think I'm going to die? I don't think so. Not if God says that. And it's the same thing. He's going to raise us up from the dead. Remember in the book of, it's not in your notes, and I didn't research this, but I think it's in the book of Isaiah, maybe chapter 37, 38, the valley of dry bones. You remember that? You know, God's able to take all these dead bones, and He's able to put them back together and put the sinews on it and the flesh on it. Of course, the idea there is God has the ability to bring Israel back to power if He chooses to. But the example that's given is the ability that God can resurrect dead bodies if He wants to. Okay? And we have assurance to know that God's going to pull that off someday. That part of us that lives forever, it's going to be clothed in something. We're going to live with God forever. What is it going to be like? What kind of hope do we have through the Bible and through the belief in God? Look at Revelation chapter 7. Remember, the Revelation letter really has 2 big parts. The front part is kind of a view of how the world operates, and that's up to about 7. And then you have a view of Revelation as to what's going on behind the scenes, which is more the divine part, and that's the latter part of Revelation. And so you have the same event that's talked about at heaven in both parts there. In chapter 7, and looking at verses 9 through 17, here we go. 7, 9 through 17. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the 4 living creatures, and fell on their faces before the throne and worshiped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, "Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from?" And I said to him, "Sir, you know." So he said to me, "These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God." See, there's the hope right there. "Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. They shall neither hunger any more nor thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes." That's what God offers. Okay, that's the hopefulness that comes from believing in God. We're more than biological engines. There's a piece of us that's spiritual and lasts forever. Read through Revelation chapter 21, 22 for the rest of that. It's reads similarly, but this idea of no tears, God wiping away the tears. There's no pain. There's no suffering. There's no sorrow there. But that privilege and that blessing of being in God's presence and bowing before him and worshiping him forever and ever at his throne. What a hope. And you and I are privileged to have that hope through Jesus. That Jesus said, "I came, I died, and I was raised from the dead to give you this if you want it." Okay? And so when we talk to people about believing in God, what we really communicate to them is, do you have anything like this? Do you have a hope that's like this? Believing in God will give you that hope, because when you believe in what God says and believe that he's faithful in what he says, you can have this too. So you see, the progression is we've got to build that concept that God exists. We have to build the basis for God has told us what we need to know, and we have the blessing of knowing what he offers us is tremendous hope. Okay? Isn't that great? And so when we talk to people, this is a progression we can lead them through. Help them to see, where does this hope come from? This hope comes from God. And if you don't have God, you don't have hope. You don't have anything like that. So there's a real benefit and a real comfort in believing in God. We'll talk next week, Lord willing, about the final one, and that is belief in God is inevitable. Okay, and that'll conclude our discussion on this series. All right, any comments, additions? All right, Ecclesiastes is real important to our generation. Okay, it really is, because that's where people are. I think it's as much by accident as by non-work, but people have really ended up being in a place that Solomon was without even realizing it. All right, no other comments.
We're thankful Solomon was smart enough to write it down for our reference.
Amen. Yeah, we're thankful that Solomon was smart enough to write it down for our reference and for God to preserve it. I think God had a hand in that too. But yeah, you know, the amazing thing to me, the scriptures is, you go back into 1 Peter chapter 1, God's given us everything that pertains to life and godliness. Ecclesiastes is kind of the starting point on that for a lot of people. And it's something that God gave so that we can get there. Yeah, perfect. All right, going once, going twice. I'm going to be quiet. Brother Joe, you want to lead us in a closing prayer? Okay.
Let's pray together. Father, we're thankful for the time we've shared together, as we always are thankful for every time we are together. We ask you to bless us in our efforts to seek out those who are lost in this dying world, and help them to understand the hope that we do have, and help them to understand that some serious, anything you want to preach. Let's go. That's good.
Yeah, that's kind of where I've been thinking on some of this stuff is that you really have to get into people's thinking.
Yeah, you do.
And this is a door. I don't know if it's only one, you know.
It's one, but it helps you, it helps them to realize, we talk about, you gotta start where somebody is, where they are.
Yeah.
It helps them to realize where they are
Yeah.
and where they're not.
Yeah.